Hey y'all, it's your girl Francina, and I am here to talk to you today about Ernest Hemingway, the great American novelist. I am doing this because I have a great opportunity partnering. Here goes, sponsored by PBS. PBS is coming out with a three-part, 6-hour documentary on Hemingway's life as a writer, etc., etc. So, real quick, this video is sponsored by PBS. Our favorite learning channel is bringing us a three-part, 6-hour film series exploring the life and work of Ernest Hemingway. The documentary paints an intimate picture of Hemingway, the writer, a man whose deeply influential work sought to capture the human condition in sparse prose, while also penetrating the myth of Hemingway, the man's man, to reveal a deeply troubled and ultimately tragic figure. The documentary features a plethora of Hemingway's work: American letters, novels, including The Sun Also Rises, A Farewell to Arms, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and The Old Man in the Sea. Also his short fiction, pieces such as The Hills Like White Elephants, The Short and Happy Life of Francis Macumber, Up in Michigan, Indian Camp, and The Snows of Kilimanjaro, as well as his nonfiction work, Death in the Afternoon and A Movable Feast. But in this documentary, Hemingway is not just a literary giant. He is also a man who in his final years suffered from chronic alcoholism and serious mental illness. Starting April 5th, watch the rise and fall of Hemingway free with PBS app, available on iOS, Android, Roku streaming devices, Apple TV, Android TV, Amazon Fire TV, Samsung Smart TV, and Comcast. Enjoy. So y'all, since your sis got some early admission into the first screening of the documentary, I have lots of thoughts and ideas about it. Overall, I do want to say my idea of the documentary was it's very fascinating. I don't know why people pay me to be a smart person because my first thoughts were, wow, they have a lot of like footage and like archive stuff from way back then. I didn't know that they had picture machines back then. Like, wow, is that video? Oh my gosh, how old is this? Like, I'm one of those people where you pull out a VHS, like a VCR, and I'm like, oh my God, what is that? Even though, I used to use them. So jokes on everybody for thinking I'm an intellectual. However, I do want to say that I was thoroughly fascinated the entire time, if not by just the contents of the documentary, because I think they do a really great job of showcasing and collecting information and distributing it in a very consumable timeline. Like, I felt like I really got a good picture of what life was like specifically for Hemingway, because I think it's important to distinguish the perspective that we're looking at, that it's not like telling me of the times, but just for that specific man and how people viewed that specific man. But second, I thought it was great when I consume material, I like to analyze it, and not to say that I like take time and have to think about everything. I do. I'm sorry. I'm a thinker. All y'all who are out here like, we don't like to think, don't know you, couldn't be you, can't do it. But I do like to, when I like to consume consciously. I'm thinking about the people who are talking. And in this case, they were either literary scholars or writers, people who knew him personally, like his children, or, some of them women who tasted the Hemingway. There were lots of accounts like that, or they were reading letters, all sorts of different things. But it was very interesting to see how people looked at Hemingway, and I think that is the most fascinating thing. So for sure, y'all should check out the documentary. But also, especially in a way of being able to look outside of yourself and to look at how people create these constructs, these mythos and legends around people that are really just kind of false and like kind of crazy, how people be drinking their own juice. That is what was most fascinating to me, because if I were to look at this some years later as like an archived thing, like this documentary on them, I'd be so interested in these people that were speaking about Hemingway and being like, wow, y'all were drinking Kool-Aid juice. Like, this is insane. I think the idea is that we're supposed to be learning about Hemingway. I'm learning about how people behave around who they believe are iconic figures and how they create iconic figures, and how while these same people are considered thinkers and intellectuals, they're so trapped in a box of, patriarchal thinking or very specific social constructs that while there's some cognitive dissonance there, they choose to ignore it for the status quo while also being people who think they buck the status quo. It's wild, y'all. It's wild. First, I want to get into the book that I read. I wanted to, as an overpreparer, reread The Sun Also Rises. It is the only novel written by Hemingway. It's the only novel I've read by Hemingway. It's also his first novel. He wrote many short stories before that, which I've read like one or two of them in school a long time ago. I read this in college a long time ago and did not like it then. I have the same general thoughts and feelings this time, except for now I'm just much more conscious of why I have those thoughts and feelings, and feel less intimidated about my own opinion on it. Like, I'm less questioning, like, this ain't it, y'all. Whereas before I was like, man, all these academias are like, this is amazing. What am I not getting? I must be stupid. No, academia. An intellectual academic, I think, is an oxymoron, honestly, I have to say. I will get more into that later. If you were triggered by that, I don't apologize, brah. Just take it as it is, sis. I'm sorry. If that's just how you feel, it's just how you feel. I can't be held responsible for your feelings. I just can't. I'm responsible for mine. So with that being said, I do want to dive into this book first before I talk about the documentary specifically, because they do tie together in so many different ways. So first, The Sun Also Rises is about a man named Jake or something like that. And he lives in Paris. He's an expatriate, that word. And he's a newspaper writer. And I'm using all these ands on purpose. It's because I've been reading Hemingway lately, and he says and about 15,000 times. I will be reading y'all a passage so you know exactly what I mean. But Jake just likes to work, hang around, get drunk with his friends. He's depressed. There's something that Hemingway does where he does not like to explain what's going on. He likes to talk around it, and everybody's like, this is so, like, magic. Like, he's a magician, and I'm like, y'all, it ain't that deep, but okay. Jake was in the war, and I think he got his penis blown off, or it is severely injured to the point where he can no longer use it, and I think that fuels some of his depression. Jake is not very emotionally intelligent, like our good friend Hemingway. I'll get more into that a little bit. So you don't really understand the effects. You're just seeing things. And that's it. I think Hemingway is really great at showing how people who live inside of social constructs are very robotic and very emotionally dense and don't really know why they do things or what they're doing. And sometimes when they start to think about them, they go, no! And then they like reject all thoughts and clear cognitive functioning to just go right back into their more stupor of, liquor and just day-to-day depressive life. He's very good at showing that people do that. I don't think he's that great at understanding the emotional reasons of why people do that, or the human behavior of why people do that cognitively. I think he gets it emotionally because his look at me talking about the documentary, even though I was going to talk about the book, but because he grew up with a father who had depression. I think there's a lot of generational depression in that DNA, which probably went unchecked given how that turned out in his family. And so I'm sure he knows and he sees things, but he does not think about them deeply enough in an emotionally aware and emotionally intellectual way that gives honesty to things like this. So that being said, Jake is drunk with all his friends. They go to Spain. They watch some bullfighting. Antics ensue. The entire book, when I tell you the entire book, anytime I would come to a page and there was no dialogue, I was weeping. I was crying. You know why? Not because it was great, but because I was like, oh no, here we go into Big Daddy's bullet journal diary entry. I did not ask to see his traveler's notebook. I do not want to know how far he has to walk from one cafe to the next. I don't care how you were swirling the ice cubes in your absinthe. I really don't need to know the details of how you were lining your fishing pole to catch a fish. I I don't need to know how you're packing that fish into a bag. My good friend, my good sir, if you're going to tell me things like that, I'm going to need you to insert some type of tone or some type of emotional undertone in there. You know, that undercurrent of emotion that lets you know what's going on in this person's life, so that you're like, he's not just packing fish into a bag. He's packing fish into a bag. Like, I need something like that. You know what I'm saying? But for you just to be, today I did this, today I did this, today I did this, and this, and this, and then I walked here, and then I walked there, and then I walked here. Next day, dialogue. I'm like, bruh, we need to cut this. We need to cut this. And for the fact that it took about 200 pages for us to get to the drama that is happening in the book, I feel like I was emotionally abused by a narcissist. Every now and again, he'd like hit on some stuff that was happening, and I'd be like, okay, here we go. Here's some actual action. 2 seconds later, oh, y'all don't want to talk about it, so you're just going to get drunk instead. Okay, now we're walking to Bistros again. We're walking, and we're walking, and we're walking. We're in Spain. Somebody fisticuffs. There's some fisticuffs. Ooh, it's going down. I feel like I'm finally getting what I'm supposed to be getting. Why am I this deep into the book to get any of that? Why? It was emotional abuse. By the end of the book, I felt hungover. Not because I was in with my drunken friends. No. But because I was asking myself, why these choices? Why these choices? I felt the stupor of being tried over and over again. No, never again. You will not have this soul ever again. Anyways, with all that being said, y'all, I'm going to read y'all the passage because I feel like it is important for you to know exactly what I'm talking about. But before I do that, I want to mention in the documentary, this is where the documentary and the book kind of meet for why I'm glad I read it and why I want to talk about this a little bit and the documentary, is that as they were talking about Hemingway as a writer, oftentimes the other writers or the literary scholars would mention how he would break all the rules, how he defied the odds, how he was so sparse in his storytelling, when many others were verbose. Joyce, difficult. Stein, incredibly unintelligible. But Hemingway, man with a basic high school education, could enjoy. And I was like, y'all, not that I like Joyce or Stein. I read a poetry collection by Stein once. And I was like, girl, I don't get it. I think it had something to do with spoons and kitchenware, and I was like, I'm just not here for it. I think I've had to read James Joyce, who wrote Ulysses. I had to read The Dubliners by him, and I was very, very, very bored. So, it's not like I'm enjoying these other folks here. When people say like they're difficult, it's like they're not intellectually difficult. They just use more words to hide the fact that they have no emotional intelligence. And so therefore they're trying to confuse people into thinking they're good because, cover up all my insecurities with high vocabulary. People do that all the time. That's why I'm like, intellectual academic, it's an oxymoron, honestly, because if you're constantly only believing in and eating what you've been taught to eat and believe in, and you're regurgitating, it's the snake eating the tail, baby. You're not thinking outside of the box. I will get back onto that later and talk about how I saw that in the documentary, and that I'm just not, being a hater, because there ain't no reason to hate. Do you with the universities, like I'm not out here to hate on them. I just like to spit facts. That being said, that was so mean and so shady. I'm so sorry. That being said, some of the writers also talked about how Hemingway had this ability to make you feel what people really felt, like the people of the times were really thinking and feeling. And he also had this way of capturing this tiny details of things. And we're going to read this passage because I think this is a beautiful example of it. And I'm going to read it the way that I be reading it in my head, which you'll see. It was dim and dark, and the pillars went up high, and there were people praying, and it smelt of incense, and there were some wonderful big windows. I knelt and I started to pray, and prayed for everybody I thought of. Brett, and Mike, and Bill, and Robert Kahn, and myself, and all the bullfighters, separately for the ones I liked, and lumping all the rest. Then I prayed for myself again. And while I was praying for myself, I found I was getting sleepy. So I prayed that the bullfights would be good, and that it would be a fine fiesta, and that we would get some fishing. I wondered if there was anything else I might pray for. And I thought I'd like to have some money. So I prayed that I would make a lot of money. And then I started to think how I would make it. And thinking of making money reminded me of the Count. And then I wondered about where he was. And regretting I hadn't seen him since that night in Montmartre. And about something funny Brett told me about him. And as all the time I was kneeling with my forehead on the wood in front of me and was thinking of myself as praying, I was a little ashamed and regretted that I was such a rotten Catholic, but realized there was nothing I could do about it, at least for a while, and maybe never. But that anyway, it was a good, grand religion, and I only wished I felt religious, and maybe I would next time. And then I was out in the hot sun on the steps of the cathedral, and the four fingers of my thumb and my right hand were still damp, and I felt them dried in the sun. The sunlight was hot and hard, and I crossed over beside some buildings and walked back alongside to the hotel.
He has a swashbuckling quality, so changed the language.
He's hungry, he's excited, he loved being in love.
They're absolute miracles of prose.
Y'all, when I say it sounds like an 8-year-old's diary of their day-to-day life, I'm saying that because I have an 8-year-old and I make him write things, and that's how it sounds. So I'm confused. When they say that this man is profound, I'm like, show me how and where. This is... Y'all. I'm like, it was... Cultural context. I need some. Did people think he was profound because he started the bullet journal? Did they think he was profound because this was the first example of the travel log? I was thinking and I was like, it's bad when I start pulling out other classics in comparison because I'm just generally not a fan. But when I think about Dickens, who is very verbose, right? The man was paid to write by the word, so of course he had words for days. But when I think about the way he writes stories and the way that he really tries to imbue emotion, I think he's a very sympathetic writer. He lacks that kind of empathetic touch because, he's very much narrating a story and putting on that pathos, as you will. But even then, the man knows how to write action. He knows how to string some plots. The man knows how to do mystery. The man is here giving a story. You know what I'm saying? Even if you don't like it, if you don't like him, you're here because the story is still engaging. Ernest Hemingway. So my thing is, everyone kind of acclaimed Hemingway for being this sparse writer in contrast to, the very verbose people before and of that day. And I'm like, y'all are praising him for doing the most when he's actually doing the very least. Usually what I think of as a sparsity in writing is using less words to convey all of this emotional understanding. You take all of this and you take all that verbose, overthinking, over talking about this deep emotional complex idea. And you take that emotional complexity and you use less words and it's poignant. Hemingway just uses less words. There's no poignant emotional depth there. And I know that I just picked one passage, but it's also important. Every word on every page counts. And that's me speaking as a writer. So when I say that if I read a passage like that, and I've ever written a passage like that, you should walk away from that passage understanding how the character is feeling emotionally in that moment, using being and praying in this cathedral, how they're projecting all of the emotional complexity onto this moment. Because that is what people do. People project their emotional complexities onto things. That's how they talk about things because that's called perception. It's how you perceive things. So the way I'm seeing something is based off of my collective understanding of how I feel, think, and know of a thing. There was none of that in here. It's just some basic Chad going about his day with no thoughts, no cognitive real understanding. Now, that being said, Hemingway was very young when he wrote this. I forget how old, but it was his first novel, and I think he was still in his 20s. Oh, y'all, check me on the documentary. How old was he? Y'all should watch the documentary so you know. And that being said, I don't expect someone that young to be able to be that emotionally intelligent. We can't all be like me. I wish I was joking. Let me stop. But we can't all be that, we can't expect somebody that young to be that emotionally intelligent. But I do expect the people who consider themselves intellectual scholars, academic elites, who pride themselves and spend all of their time reading and thinking to have that cognitive reasoning in their head going on and saying something like, wow, he's really young and onto something. Not, look at what he did. This is so profound and groundbreaking, because it's not. It's not. It's giving me nothing. It's giving me dry. It's giving me Chad energy. It's giving me manic pixie dream girl, and everybody's like, wow, oh my God, he's so, oh my God. It's giving me, I had a pretty face when I was young. It's giving me, I make white women go crazy with my overt masculinity, but also having a soft side Cancer sun energy. It's giving me, I'm a Gemini in the third house energy, and I can't. I just can't. So y'all, with all that being said, I want to go more into the documentary about how Ernest Hemingway, a man who is barely doing it, really, became Ernest Hemingway, the man who does it all. What I noticed very early on in the documentary was that all of these writers and academic scholars were talking about the myth of Hemingway. And I just want to pause and say, when do we usually use the word myth when talking about figures, especially very specific people? I don't know, maybe when we're talking about gods? So automatically, I'm a little triggered, because I'm like, why y'all making this man into a god just because he liked to fish and hunt? And he also liked writing and reading. They said he's the old man, everyman. I'm going to bet my bottom dollar. Is that a saying? I'm going to bet it that the reason why Hemingway was popular was not because of men of the time, but because of the white women who were like, oh my God, daddy can hunt, but he can also read.
Oh, Mr. Hemingway, how I love you. How exciting you are. How a lot of things happen around you. And besides all that, I love you anyway. How I love the way you love me. And your flannel shirt seems a strangely beautiful thing. And it smells so good besides. Someday, if I don't watch out, there'll be a poem on the smell of a clean white shirt that'll raise up the hair on the dead. Hadley Richardson.
And they did not know what to do with their panties after that. I'm gonna bet my dollar on this, because I see this in publishing to this day. And these people knew he was lying half the time about everything he ever said.
The problem with alcoholism, and I don't know why it works like this, it makes you a liar. Primarily to yourself. You're always lying to yourself. With that masculinity, with that stoicism, Hemingway was doomed in a way.
Let's go back. The documentary, I think, gave us such a great picture of who Hemingway was, because they cleared up a lot of misconceptions that academia has, thrown into the mythos, that he was part of the lost generation because he was in the war. First of all, my man's ran to the war. He ran. His mom was like, no. Yes, his mom dressed him up. Oh, we will talk about the gender fluidity and all of the interesting constructs of seeing that play out in the documentary with people on academia versus like how he was living life, because I think that's interesting, very odd and convoluted. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the fact that this man ran to war. He was nearsighted, so he could not join the front line, even though he wanted to. Let's remember, he wanted to. So he went to the Red Cross in Italy, where there was not really much going on. He saw a lot of dead bodies, very horrific, oh my God. But he was not satisfied with that horrificness. He decided to go sell candy bars to the men in trenches. Okay, he wasn't selling them, he was handing them out. But he was handing out chocolate bars like the Little Miss Girl Scout, war-seeking crazy that he was. And ended up getting blown up by a mortar that was 3 feet from him and had all this shrapnel in his leg. And then as they were gurning him out, I think some Italians shot at them, or I don't know what was going on there. Anyways, he got shot a few times in his leg, and then he spent the rest of the war in hospital recovering, and then he went home. And I'm like, I'm not downplaying his experience as much as I'm disturbed by his experience that was versus the way academia talks about it. Like he was drafted, a young man thrown into this horror pit. And it's like, to some extent, yes, society has a way of drumming up these ideas and these fancies of adventure. Me, on the other hand, I'm really thinking that from a young age, because his father dealt with depression, because he had a very strong female figure in his life, which, let's talk about this now. So getting into his home life early on, it's interesting talking about the dynamic with Hemingway when it comes to feminine versus masculine energy, because a lot of people consistently talk about and debate the fact that he was so masculine. And I think specifically in white culture doesn't understand masculine and feminine energy in the same way that indigenous cultures do, because it's very much an energy and spiritual understanding of things, and those constructs exist under, in a lot of, I won't say all, indigenous spiritual practices. And when it comes to white culture, there seems to be a very diluted understanding of it, because in a lot of white culture, American white culture, let me clarify that. In a lot of American white culture, the spiritual understanding, and especially for Hemingway, is through and based on the church. And the church doesn't do energies. The church does Jesus. So therefore, there's no understanding really there that is inherent or passed down and all that kind of stuff. So it seems like Hemingway has an awful lot, and you can read it in the books, but he's often going back and forth based off what is feminine, what is masculine energy. One of the female writers or scholars in the documentary mentioned how all of the detractors of Hemingway who think that he detests women, she thinks that, like he obviously didn't, because sometimes he wrote as if he was a woman. Anyways, this woman was really drinking the sauce. Every time she talked, I was like, what you gonna tell me about Hemingway now, girl? Just tell me you love this man and you wanted to be one of his ladies. It's so difficult to really speak about in a clear way. Because it is very convoluted and mixed up and twisted and all of those types of bits. But ultimately, you see that his mother, who dressed him up with his sister as twins often, as both a set as girls and a set as boys, whatever kind of did her fancy. And it wasn't some free thinking, forward thinking type of thing. It seemed more very gender constructed for like laughs and giggles for her own personal part. But because he grew up like that, he grew up with a lot of women in his life. I think he had many sisters, and with his mom. And then his dad was his male figure, but his dad also had depression. And anything dealing with the mind tends to be feminine energy, dealing with emotions, having bouts of high emotions. That's why, like the patriarchy be like, women are so emotional. And it's like, no, that's feminine energy. That's why everybody is emotional, because emotions are things that we have as humans. And then the ability to do is more masculine energy, doing things. What I'm having such a hard time with this, but what I'm gathering from both Hemingway and Hemingway fans is a deep misunderstanding of divine feminine energy, a deep misunderstanding of the difference between gender and sex, a deep misunderstanding of Hemingway and how he saw those things, because the literary scholars and the writers were always like, so almost like look at him in the way that he writes a main female. She's so androgynous. Like that's we should be proud and forward thinking about that. And I'm like, this is Chad doing the least, first of all. And second, the cognitive dissonance in, you know what it is? It's giving me, this is what it is. The way that academia looks at Hemingway and the way that Hemingway is this. Hemingway dresses up in his girlfriend's cheerleading outfit on Gender Bender Day in high school. And everybody's like, oh my God, dude, look at your thighs. Oh my God, dude, you got that booty. Yeah, bro. Bra. Right? That's what's happening. Academia looks at that and they're like, oh my gosh, what an iconic, complex figure of a man. And I'm just like, y'all are the same people who grew up in the same era, because all of them are old, where if Eugene, who is gay, and everybody knows Eugene is gay, but nobody talks about him being gay because, you know, you're not supposed to talk about that thing. If Eugene came to school in a pink shirt with a little bit of gloss on his lips, y'all have just flipped your skirts, wouldn't have known what to do. You would have talked about how it's a distraction, how social politics have no place in the classroom. Y'all have talked about how, while those are his choices, he should not be forcing his choices on others. It's just, there's the cognitive dissonance for me of how people of this time viewed femininity and masculinity and the fluidity of everything when it came to Hemingway as a positive thing, but when it came to people living their actual lives as such a bad thing. The confusion maybe. And I think that is the power of the mediocre Chad white man, is that he can defy all odds. This is a man who can do the thing that society says you're not allowed to do, and society goes, what a god. And somebody just trying to live their life, doing their own little thing in their house, who does not represent that Chad white man energy, gets, you know, bullets. So it's just interesting to me. Also the cognitive dissonance. I'm going to kind of jump into that a little bit because I don't want this video to be too long, even though there's so much to jump into. With that being said, I want to jump into a little bit more of the cognitive dissonance that kind of goes on with academia when it comes to Hemingway and like just general morals. For instance, we have, I think, a Black man. He could be a biracial man, whatever have you, but he did appear very brown. And when talking very specifically, and the reason why I think that he's Black, and he's like one of the only Black guys really in it, he was the first person to bring up race and how Hemingway loves to drop the N-word for no particular reason. So, and then there was a white scholar who followed up with how he, you know, is Hemingway racist? He didn't say that word specifically, but he was like, you can tell he was posed the question. He's like, you know, I think to try to put Hemingway into a box would be wrong. You know, like he was definitely trying to capture the times. How many times have we heard that in academia? They're just capturing the time. This is the time and this is how the people talk in this time. And I'm like, okay, but is the time racist? Yes or no? Like, why are we skirting around this? The time was racist. Was he racist? Yes. If he's just like the people in his time, and the time is racist, why don't 1 + 1 = 2? Like, why is it so difficult? Why are we pretending like an apple isn't an apple? And also, by way of Hemingway's work, there's a scene in here where he meets up with a friend. They're on a train. His friend had been like, they're not on a train yet, but his friend had gone to Italy, like Vienna, and like here, there, and the other. And he's like telling about his trip. And he's like, I don't want to talk about Vienna. I was really tight, which I finally figured out meant drunk. And he's like, oh, well, tell me about it. Have another drink and try to remember about your trip. So he then goes to tell him about watching a boxing match and how it was kind of crazy and how one boxer had knocked out the other one. It was supposed to be a fixed fight, but the Italian guy wasn't very good at fighting, and the Black guy really was good at fighting. And every time they talk about the Black man, which has to be at least 15 or 17 times, he doesn't use the word or the term, the African dude, which I think he might have been from Africa, because I think he went back to Cologne. Maybe not. Anyways, they don't use the term from where this man hails from, where his ethnicity is from. He just uses the N-word over and over and over and over and over. He doesn't have to say the tall man. I mean, there's no other way to describe to Hemingway a man of dark color other than N-I-G-G-E-R. And I'm just like, bruh, if I have to read that word one more time, I will go to your grave myself. So my whole thing from it is not that Hemingway is a racist. Obviously, He's a white privileged man who travels around and thinks he owns the world and the world is his oyster simply because he exists. He also lacks a spiritual understanding between himself and something higher. And I don't mean religious because, again, religious and spirituality are two different things. Religion is a community-based thing and spirituality is an individual-based thing. And when you lack spirituality, you lack a tie to something other than yourself that gives you context and meaning to yourself. You lack the balance of divinity of masculine and feminine energy, which again are not gendered at all. It's not a construct of gender. It's an energy where masculine is the act of doing, the act of physically creating something. So for instance, building a cathedral, and feminine and divine energy is the act of thoughts, thinking and knowing that this cathedral is a place of spiritual worship. So together they make this place have this feeling of this ethereal feeling. Whereas one without the other, you just either have feeling and the place isn't ethereal because there's no place, or you just have some bricks, right? So it's the things that come together that create this spiritual thing. And that is the coming together of the divine and the masculine infinity, especially by an understanding of lots of indigenous cultures, which white American culture really doesn't have. So it's well understood why Hemingway doesn't have it. There was a point in the documentary where a writer makes a comment that the thing he can't understand is why, when Hemingway was surrounded by so much death and war, he'd go out and seek more death by, these bullfights and by hunting. And I'm like, that's because he's not obsessed with death per se in the way that you were thinking of it, because you were thinking in terms of very physical death. He's obsessed with divine feminine energy, which is the energy of death, the destruction and creation in itself. That's why he's also a creative. He likes and he wants a bigger understanding of himself and of the world that he lives in. It's just because he has no spirituality, he's going out here consuming things like a crazy person, an insatiable need to know and to take and to take and to know, which is, as a lot of indigenous people understand and know, the mark of colonization and colonizers. But that being said, what drove me crazy with the cognitive dissonance is because there's a lot of in academia, they don't really understand more than just what they know already. And they consistently are recycling, hence classics, consistently recycling, learning and talking about the same thing, as if you can garner something new from it as your culture is changing. If your culture is over here, changing and doing more things over here, and you keep trying to use this to relate to something over here, that's crazy. Am I right or am I wrong? But the cognitive dissonance of race in here, of the fact that they didn't want to just all out be like, yeah, he's racist. The cognitive dissonance of just the fact that this man writes so poorly, and they know he writes poorly. In the documentary, one of the writers says he breaks every rule, but then he goes on to say, but the rhythmic incantation. I read that passage to y'all. Y'all can decide whether you found it rhythmically, like your thing or not. By all means, things are subjective and based on perception, perspective in this life. But it's just this inability to stop mythosing a white man for just doing the least, and for stop excusing everything and trying to make every little thing that he does give it meaning and complexity, so therefore the legend and the mythos can live on. That's it for me. It's the feeding into it and making it bigger than what it is, to make it something that's bigger than what it is, so that you have something that's here when really it was always down here. And I think, honestly, and I'm wrapping it up, that the documentary does such a great way of showing you that without telling you that. Like, you can definitely discern that for yourself, or you can just listen to these people and sop up the juice too. Because there are many times where they're like, this guy would just lie. He's outright lying. He lies all the time. In fact, he hates the fact that sometimes he has to live up to his lies. And I was just like, y'all are making that such a, he's this poor man. He had to live up to these personas and get away from these people. And I'm like, that's what happens when you lie all the time to people. Like, case in point, YouTube today, all y'all who be watching YouTube and be standing all these YouTubers, and then you get upset when they don't turn out to be who they are projecting themselves to be. Y'all Y'all, what mythos are you creating today with the basic people of our time? That's a question. Who are you mythosing and why? Mythos yourself. Be your own divine being instead of constructing this around other people. And I don't mean it just like I think my total opinion on it is that Hemingway by no means deserves to be torn down for being a human who just breathed and existed. I think it's, again, the documentary really showcases that it's the society around us, it's us as a collective, as if as individuals who buy into these types of things and don't question them to the point of dismantling them. While we question and we see the thing that we can dismantle, and then we use some type of cognitive dissonance to dissuade ourselves from actually dismantling it. And that is what academia has done to Hemingway, is they've created this thing that doesn't even exist.
I hate the myth of Hemingway. It obscures the man.
In order to have something new to write, he had to have something new to live.
The man is much more interesting than the myth.
Yes, again, he's a complex man, but we are all complex people. He was just a dude that went to go hunt, and he liked to fish, and he liked to write his basic girl diary stuff. And people were like, but is he a god? No! I mean, like, no more than, an individual person is a god particle, and they are also all, God. No more than that. No more than the next average Joe, the next average Becky, the next average LaShonda, the next average Pedro's. Like, no more than Miko over there sitting in the corner. No more or less than anyone else. And it's wild to me that academia has still yet to understand what it does and how it perpetuates so many different systematic issues of today. And yet academia believes itself to be so left, so conscious, and so thinking, so forward, the forefront of the conscious mind of humanity. And it's like, are you? You snake eating its tail, are you? So that's why I believe that academia and an academic intellectual is an oxymoron, and Hemingway has proven that. Thank you, Ernest. Thank you for your earnesty. But no, y'all should definitely check out the documentary. It was great. I love PBS documentaries. I don't know if I should say this on a paid ad, but my cousin once told me, she's like, I love these documentaries. I go to sleep to them, which by far is better than those murder podcasts that a lot of people go to sleep to. In my personal opinion, not trying to go to sleep to murder. Like, what are you feeding your unconscious minds, people? But just, they are soothing to watch. They're interesting by all means. And this one definitely topped the cake. So thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you aren't already subscribed to this magnificent beast. And also, for my own personal plugs, Vibe Check, the only card game that you can actually have conversations to get to know another human being and person, whether that's a friend, family member, or a significant lover in your life. The only card game that helps you check the vibe. And of course, don't forget to pick up your girl's book, Smash It. Talk about somebody who actually is emotionally intelligent and very sparse and uses words that anybody who doesn't even have a high school degree, since this is for people who generally are about 17, 16, can read and understand, but also with depth and emotional intelligence in every word. We're giving this to this man, but here I am right here. When y'all make my documentary about me, I want to be alive because I want to see how y'all turn every little mundane thing that I do into goddess energy. I am living for it. I'm waiting for it. I'm speaking it into existence now. Now, the mythos of Francina Simone. Tito Bail to ta for now. Bye.